Lagercrantz. Sorry. Oh, how lovely to be here. I just had a nap, you know. I'm jet-lagged and confused and everything, and I had a nap, so I will probably do something.
Tuesday, so it must be
yes, I will probably talk too much or do something crazy.
Well,
but anyway, shoot.
So, all right, now I am prepared. At least I am. Normally, I don't write anything down, right? I wing it. But tonight I am.
Okay.
I am prepared. So the first thing I would like to say is that David's second book in his Millennium Trilogy debuted at #1 on the Times bestseller list. So felicitations.
Yes. And it's #2 now, actually, on New York Times bestseller list.
Did I say #1?
No, it was #2.
I said #2, right?
That was #1, the first one, and now it's #2. Oh, well, go on. It was #1. It was #1.
How did you do in England? Because I know you came from the UK.
We had this old gentleman that I actually met, Jean Le Carré. And he was #1 and I was #2. And I could live with that. I actually met him in a bookstore and I sort of bow like meeting, you know, Holy Father.
That is really exciting that you got to meet him because he lives in darkest Cornwall and is not often seen. I sent you all, I hope I sent you all a link to his video on CBS. And if I didn't, I really would like you to watch it. And here's the unnerving thing that you might not know. If you close your eyes, he sounds exactly like Lee Child. I mean, to the inflection, to the tone, and he even looks a little bit like Lee Child. But Rob was in the other room and he heard the man talking. He said to me, "What's Lee doing on CBS?" And I said, "It's David Cornwell."
So
AKA John Le Carré.
So I sound like Lee Child?
No,
Yes.
John Le Carré sounds like
Oh,
Lee Child.
sorry, you see, I'm absolutely confused. Does he really? Yeah.
I went too fast for you. I'm sorry.
No, I'm not that quick as you. I mean, you're so witty and, you know, I'm a bit slow, Swedish. You've heard about us, haven't you? We're slow and so
So, in addition to the bestseller list, The Girl Who Takes an Eye for an Eye has had lots of rave reviews. One from my friend Tom Nolan in the Wall Street Journal. And I'm going to read it to you because I think it really is lovely. Wonderful. It would be hard to imagine a sequel more faithful to its work of origin than this one. Salander, though, emerges as the most dramatic, charismatic, and effective investigator of them all. Weak in social skills, but unmatched in speaking blunt truth to corrupt power. Wow!
That's good.
Is there corrupt power in Sweden that she could be speaking to?
Absolutely, and in fiction is even more corrupt power.
But
and I mean, she needs corrupt power to really be Lisbeth Salander. But of course it is. Of course it is.
Do I remember Swedish history right that there was an actual incident in the 1970s that perhaps was part of the reason Stieg Larsson framed the stories the way he did?
Well, I don't know what you're thinking about, but I think in one way the Nordic noir genre grew up when Sweden was such a welfare state and really nothing was happening. So we were, you know, dreaming of violence and dramatic scenes. I mean, in states or countries where you have a lot of violence, maybe you dream about love stories. So the sort of Nordic noir grow up in this very, you know, safe, you know, Sweden were so calm those days. But on the other hand, there was this thing that we had a state that were so equal, and we sort of felt that Sweden was the best country in the world, you know, and the state took care of us. But behind the facade, there was something rotten going on. And sometimes there was, because there was some major revelation in the 70s. So maybe that was that.
I think that might be what I have to admit that I'm a bit shaky, but an interesting
Yeah, me too. So
I was telling David that, you know, Rob and I have traveled in Sweden, and the first time it was a little bit disorienting because it all depends on who's telling the stories. So we were in Sweden and then we went to Finland. And then in Sweden, the history of the last 500 years is one thing. And then in Finland, there's a somewhat different spin to it. And then we were in Russia. which is yet a different...
Absolutely different spin to it, certainly, yeah.
Yeah, so you can get dizzy going around the Balkan, really. Well. So you're a very well-known author and journalist. You've written biographies. Why did you take on this project of writing additional books about Lisbeth Salander?
Well, it's a bit of a long story, but shall I try to tell it anyway in a little short way? You know, I grew up in a very high scholar literary home where you were supposed to write fine books and so on. And I tried, of course. I wrote about Alan Turing, the English mathematician and codebreaker. But then my publisher had this absolutely crazy idea that I would be a ghostwriter. And I don't know if you have heard about Zlatan Ibrahimovic. Have you heard of him? You haven't?
I couldn't even pronounce it. I was going to say. I ducked bringing it up.
But I just love that you haven't heard of him. And it's the same thing. If you mention the most famous baseball player here in the States, I would say, who?
Yeah.
But Zlatan Ibrahimovic, we used to say in Sweden, we have, Ibrahimovic, and then we have the king, and then we have the prime minister. So he's the big icon. And my publisher had this crazy idea that I should ghostwrite his book. And I did, and there was just a strange meeting, because I'm, quite fortunate to grow up in this high scholar home, and he's from the ghetto. He's sort of the American dream for the first time in Sweden, fighting his way up to stardom. And something happened when we, colluded. I think that was my best book, and it was absolutely the fastest selling book ever in Sweden.
Okay, so
and the most, sorry.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, when you and he fused your
but something happened. Something happened. We sort of colluded. And the beautiful thing was also that the book got all these young kids, especially young boys that had never been near a bookstore or a library. They actually start reading. And that was one of the most beautiful things that has happened to me, because I grew up to writing for the educated people. And then when I went to bookstores like this, and there were tough guys coming in, Ooh, are they going to fight? No, they're going to read their first book. Anyway, so that was sort of the start of the beginning. And then I changed agent to my wonderful Magdalena Hedlund. She's sitting here. An applaud for her. And when I changed her, we were quite happy about that. So we had a couple of glasses of wine. And then I had this crazy idea that I said, maybe I'm this crazy author that are best when I collude myself with someone else. Maybe it gets too depressing, or I'm complaining too much, using writing as therapy when I just, write my own stories. And then I saw Magdalena's eyes. And then she was making the secret calls, maybe David. And then one day, I belonged to Bonnier, who is the competing publishing house. And one day I got a call from Norstedts, who is the enemy in the book business. And he said, David, we would like to talk to you, but could you not come into the main entrance? That was a bit strange. I mean, I'm not allowed to go into. No, please, we want you to come down. So we went down in the basement, and in a room without any window, there was Eva Jedin, who was Stig Larsson's publisher, and she leaned over and she said, David, would you consider writing the 4th book in the Millennium series? And it's still, just been thrilled thinking about it. And you know what I said? You know what I thought? I just screamed, yes! Yes! And that's really the strange thing. I think I need to go to therapy to understand why that I didn't hesitate a nanosecond. Of course it was partly that I absolutely loved the book, that I love Lisbeth Salander. She's just my kind of character, the outsider, the rebel, like Alan Turing was in many ways, and Ibrahimovic was. But maybe it was also the challenge. I couldn't say no to this. So there it was.
So we have had in recent weeks a similar kind of author come through who have been writing for the Robert Parker estate.
Okay.
And one of the discussions we had was the challenges of taking a character that someone else created and gave a backstory to, as well as presence in the book, and then making it your own, because you can't really operate within.
You have to, yes.
You know, and so I'd be interested in knowing, because this book is a little bit of a pivot in the series, in that she's looking back on her past and all. How did you go about that? How free did you feel to start making Lisbeth your Lisbeth?
I think we were pretty agreed, everybody, that I should, of course, be trustful to his universe. I mean, all the readers, they were longing to have her back, have Lisbeth and Michael back. So I should study, I mean, all the things. I should read the book all over and over. But it wouldn't be good if I just tried to copy him. It must be a collusion between.
Well, and not only that, but you've moved forward in time.
Yes, I moved forward in time.
And so
but what I realized quite early was that I didn't just inherit great characters. I always inherited a great mythology. You know, like old superhero Lisbeth Salander has this, you know, moment that created her. Superman were sent to Earth as a Christ figure, wasn't he? You know, Batman had his parents killed, and that sort of turned him to Batman. Lisbeth had the key moment in her life, you know about that, when she saw her mother abused and raped and eventually killed about the evil father, and when she understood that the society wouldn't do anything. She has to, you know, take revenge herself. That was sort of the key moment. So I thought to myself that what I really had to do was to add to that mythology and also answer questions that Stieg Larsson hadn't had time to answer. And in the first book, I tried to answer, why is Lisbeth Salander such a great hacker? I mean, it must be a reason for that. Why does she has to handle Wasp? And in this book, the key question was, of course, what is Lisbeth Salander most famous for? A dragon tattoo. Why does Lisbeth Salander has a dragon tattoo? And I was absolutely convinced that a girl like her wouldn't put a dragon tattoo in her back without a very good reason. So I tried to, you know, to add to the mythology, and there I had to be brave.
No, I definitely think you had to be brave.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think it's so interesting that Stieg set this up, but of course he didn't live long enough to answer or pursue those.
Sadly.
And so in a way it's kind of a mission, you know, to imagine what he would have done maybe is not what you would have done, but at least you move forward with it.
But to develop the character, but it's not that often. I mean, every century, I think, we just have, you know, a couple of characters that really stick on. You know, some icon characters. If you go back to the century before that, we had Sherlock Holmes, and just now we have the superheroes, and the way to make them survive and live on is to add something that develop with their times. And when I was starting writing the first book, I actually saw the Christopher Nolan Batman movies. Have you seen them? You know, Batman Begin, and he really did that. He added darkness to the Batman and gave him more complexity.
Right, but you're still working with the skills that he gave her, the hacker skills, and
absolutely. And I read his book over and over and seeking for threads or guessing where he was going, of course.
So I have an additional question that may sort of surprise you along those lines, but there's another factor for those of us reading in English. These you wrote, I presume, in Swedish.
Yes,
certainly Stieg did. So what we're reading is a translation, and therefore there's another collaboration involved in here for us, which is the collaboration, if any, between you and the translator. Did you in fact work with him, or was he or she entirely? Was he? on his own?
Well, it's translated to 46 languages, and I just speak 42 of them. So.
Well, we're here in English, so I thought I had a shot.
I was just kidding. No, I mean he is a really wonderful guy. This George Golding. He used to be a lawyer.
Right.
But he had some question, and we were having some discussion. But it's really a tricky thing. It's a very sophisticated, thing to be a translator. But you have to, have the rhythm.
Well, it is. Some of you, well, probably few of you actually know this, but in England, there was a sort of Brexit preview, which was some years ago. Arnold Indridason won a Best Novel Award, and the English said, wait, he's from Iceland, and we should keep our dagger for British writers. So they created, instead of being rude, what they did was they created an international dagger, so that all those people from France and Iceland and Sweden and whatever couldn't win the gold dagger for Best Novel, but they could win the international dagger instead. So the role of the translator was the justification that they put out. They said, that clearly any of these works that you're reading in English that were written in another language, the translator has been a part of that. And so the award in part is based on how good the translator is. But now here's a really interesting story. Magdalena probably doesn't know this either. I had a classmate at Stanford University who surprised me one day when Camilla Lackberg was coming to visit us from Sweden. Yes. Some of you may have heard me say this before. And he wrote to me. I hadn't talked to him since 1962 when I graduated, but nonetheless, an email from him, and he said that he was the translator of Camilla Lackberg's works from Swedish to English, and his wife was going to take over, Tina Nunnally, who also does some other translations, and they would like to come and meet her. And I said, wonderful. And so they drove over from Albuquerque, apparently the epicenter of translating Scandinavian languages in English. And in the process of the evening, we got to talking about translations, and he said to me, I have an interesting story for you. And I said, okay. And he said, I'm actually the translator of the Stieg Larsson books.
Oh.
And I said, that's not the name on the book. And he said, your name is not the name on the book. What happened? And he said, well, I did the translation, and when I sent it to the English publisher, who I won't name here, but you know who he is, he thought he would improve on it, so he made 2,000 corrections to my translation into English. And I said, I am not putting my name on it now, so he is the pseudonymous translator. Did you know that? Of the Stieg Larsson works, which I think is just amazing.
Actually, I hired him to do the translations.
You did? Oh, so you really did know this story. Well, it was a revelation to us. But from that, we also then had a discussion about how translators work, and they work in a different system. I'm not sure that it would be the same for everyone, but they work on a, I think it's a per word or some such basis. They do not share in royalties.
He didn't rewrite the book.
No. But when I asked him if the amazing success of the Stieg Larsson books had made him richer, the answer was no, because, as with many contract writers...
For him.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, it's a risk. He could have bombed, in which case, he would have come out ahead. But anyway, the point of it all was that the role of the translator is, for us reading your books in English, is far more important than any of you might realize. And I think, and somebody asked me before you came out, if there were differences perhaps in...
No, and it's a very hard work being a translator, and they have to work faster and faster. But my translator, he's another kind of... This was the first book he ever translated, was mine.
Yeah.
And usually translators, they had a hard time, they don't get paid much, but my translator... they must pay him much because he had an apartment in Hong Kong, and an apartment in Paris, and one in New York, and one in Stockholm, and then a house in Cornwall. He actually owned the biggest law firm in London, and then he retired, and he wanted something to do, and he was super talented and speak, I mean, nearly 42 languages or something. And he started to learn Swedish, and my English publisher, you know, let him try, and he was the best one.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I was amused by Maureen Corrigan, who wrote in the Washington Post in her review, when she was talking about, then we'll move off language here, but she said she found that David's Millennium books have improved upon Larson's non-noir atmosphere while eradicating the worst of his stylistic tics, among them robotic dialogue and an erotic attention to his character's coffee consumption. However, now that I've met you, I realize you too are addicted to caffeine.
I'm absolutely addicted to coffee. But what really happens is interesting, that you unconsciously put a bit of yourself in it. I was in Poland a couple of months ago, and then I met quite an upset Polish journalist. She was coughing all the time, and she has to go out and smoke, you know, all the time. And then she went up, and she was obsessed. Why has they stopped smoking? And I said, yeah, they have. Stig Larsson smoked, and then it's very easy to put the cigarette in their mouth. But I don't smoke, so suddenly Mikael Blomqvist has stopped smoking. So.
It's much better for his health.
And I fancy, you know, good red wine, and Stig Larsson were more into whiskey. So I took some liberties. Yeah, so
we've already said the characters move on, so
they had to move on.
He may have had a stern letter.
I think that's a sort of evolution from whiskey to good red wines, don't you think? Well, it depends on your preference. It depends on your preference.
And maybe Mikael had a stern letter from his doctor. so we can go on. Why is it, according to information I received from your publisher in the United States anyway, you've decided to write 3 but no more? Or is that not entirely true?
No, I think that's entirely true, actually, and I think you should go with a passion. These are so important books that I should not go on routine. So I think 3 is pretty good, and I have this story of this big finale that I will now start to write when I come home after this tour. And for me, it's important actually to develop as a writer. What happens when you do crazy things? I did a touring book, which I tried to be very highbrow, and then I, write a book about Zlatan Ibrahimovic, and that happens something when you do new things.
Right.
You need new challenges. So I respect certain writers that write the same book, 20 in the series, but I couldn't do it. I need to feel this fever again, So if you have a good idea that makes me absolutely thrilled, as that time in the basement, then I will go.
Well,
so maybe you never know. Maybe when I'm 70, I will miss her and go back and write in the 4th and the 5th and the 6th. But for now, 3 will be it.
Wonderful. And I think to that point, another review that I will read to you, like The Girl in the Spider's Web, this book is a worthy successor to Larson's trilogy, but The Girl Who Takes an Eye also feels like a tipping point, excuse me, in which David Lagercrantz begins to march the saga in a direction all its own, which we've sort of mentioned. But, I can see that as a 3-act drama. You've done book 1, The Girl in the Spider's Web, and now in this one, and then you've mentioned that you have a concept for finishing up with a 3rd.
Yeah. Yes, I don't know if you read The Girl in the Spider's Web, anyone? And then there turn up a certain Camilla, evil twin sister. Okay. And, I sort of modeled her because she exists in Stig Larsson's book, but the only thing we really got to know that she was manipulative, very beautiful, and her father's favorite. And we all know how the father, Salashenko, was. So I modeled her. And wouldn't tell you too much, but I have sort of spared her, so she's just sort of a shadow in this book. So they will certainly meet again, the twin sisters. Yeah.
So one of the things I really found fascinating is you set up a duel. Elizabeth, when we see her in this book, is in prison.
Yes.
Why is she there? Let's start with that.
First of all, Lisbeth needs problems. Otherwise, she won't be Lisbeth. And she did a few crazy things in the end of the fourth book. So I had this idea. I started to write when she was wandering around in Stockholm and drinking coffee and thinking about her past, and it was pretty boring actually. So I said, why not put her in prison?
You can be God in this universe.
Yes,
why not? Indeed so. But because she's in prison, and she's moved to a maximum security prison.
Yes.
And there's a lot of bad stuff that goes on. So what you've done, which I thought was great, was you set up a duel with this really awful woman called Benito.
Benito, yes.
A woman who's got knives and terrorizing everybody.
Yes.
And in fact, the chief officer of the prison has succumbed to fear. And so the whole place is a mess.
Yeah, yeah.
And so Lisbeth already gets a mission right there.
Yeah, I mean, she needs mission. I mean, we all know that what gets her going. I mean, there is this will be this moment when she saw her mother, her freedom taken away, the mother is abusing the rape, and when she sees that, in many ways she is really the feminist fighter, and in other ways she's the female cowboy, but with a lot of better values. So when she sees this drama of her childhood again, women that are suppressed, that's really what gets her going, and that's really when she takes an eye for an eye.
But there's a young woman in the prison that is being terrorized, and she also becomes a hero or a savior in that sense, which is great. But you also give her a chance to show off her martial arts skills, in case we've forgotten that she has them. She's not just a hacker, but she's a lethal elbow.
Yeah.
Right? Right. One of the other factors, we can't tell you a whole lot about the book without spoiling it, but one of the things I thought was fascinating is the way you're exploring disinformation and the manipulation of financial markets. And I love the line where you describe it as a modern form of warfare. And I don't know about you, but if you read the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or even the Arizona Republic occasionally,
very good.
Well, we get all three papers, so every morning our driveway looks like the flag. There's a blue wrapper for the Times, a red one for the Journal, and a white one for the Republic. And I know the paperboy thinks we're making a statement. But if you read the Journal, in the financial section, it is war. I mean, on every front, it is really war.
War, yeah, and it's also, I compared it to religion, because if we don't believe in it, it will fall down. And it also tells to me we don't have money. I mean, we're not a Donald Duck, who was bathing in the money. Our money is digits. And these digits, they are going up and down with the market. And I had this thought, I mean, think of some days we will not trust that the digits would stay there. Our money in the bank is just digits going up in the beliefs. And it's, we really have started to distrust them, and they will be a catastrophe. And now we know, and certainly know, that hacking can do a lot of damage. It can influence an election. It can do. So I had this thought, what about the stock market? What about the stock market? And we now know that disinformation, fake news really is a weapon. And lies really can have a real effect. So a lie that will spread could not only, create hate or influence election, it can also make the stock market go down.
Well, and there's the whole Bitcoin thing. And in fact, a really good question is, what is backing currency at that point? I mean, once upon a time we were on the gold standard, right? And in theory we had gold and then there was the whole William Jennings Bryant and, silver and the whole bit. But today, what is it that actually backs up the dollar or the Chinese renminbi or whatever?
It's believe in the future and what we just now see. So it's all
right, and even a move, in fact, to
and it's
cashless.
and in many ways we can say that the stock market are a imaginary thing, and it's also similar to fiction. It's just we have all agreed that on this market we have agreed that our belief and analysis will, put a price on things. And the strange thing about this, if we now want to be a little bit philosophical, is that it's absolutely unpredictable. There's a lot of gurus, haven't you seen them on the financial channels telling us what we should buy and things. And they try they sound like scientists, is that the market will go up and down. But the strange thing is we have scientists, we have science who studies the weather or nature, but if they study the nature won't change. I mean, if they studied, the animals will still, behave the same thing. But when an economist studies and analyzes the stock market, the analyze will be part of the stock market. The prediction of the stock market will be part of the market.
Yeah.
So their analysis, and that makes the stock market is absolutely impossible to predict. Even many people, pretend to have the ability.
Plus, at the moment, there appear to be, I am totally ignorant in this area, so I only know what I've read, but there are apparently lots of creativity going on about financial instruments, which, if you recall, got us into trouble some years ago. And those of us who live here, we have a hotel that you're not staying in, but right up the street from you, the Phoenician, which was the product of the Lincoln Savings and Loan, when the whole savings and loan industry, was unregulated, was owned by the federal government for a while, and then they eventually sold it. But, with all these new things being created, or, various approaches to investing in financial instruments and so forth, Elizabeth's talents as a hacker become ever more dangerous and also relevant.
Also relevant, and she is a hero that we need, because when Stieg Larsson created her, hackers were really, teenagers sitting in the basement, doing crazy things.
Right.
Now we know that the worst hacking attack is done by the states or the intelligence services. We certainly need a hero as Lisbeth Salander, and we certainly need heroes like Mikael Blomqvist, because we live in times that we need good journalism more than ever, because there's so much lies, there's so much disinformation, and we know that many of this information is organized. So we really need good journalism.
So in the beginning,
And good hacking maybe also, even
Right.
though it's a bit illegal.
well, hacking's one of those words that has probably got plus and minus connotations, depending on how it's being used. In the front of the book, you do bring us up to date on many of the characters that have appeared in the books, and we know that some of them might even be at risk, for long life, because that's the way it goes when you're moving a series forward. What can you tell us about Mikael? I mean, he's the Millennium journalism, and Millennium is in play in this book. There's a story that he can tell.
Yes. Should I tell you a bit about the book, or yes?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, Lisbeth needs troubles, and Mikael needs a story. And I can just tell you, maybe I revealed a bit, but I feel tempted to do it. I'm an old reporter myself, so I always go back to my best stories that really stuck to me. And when I wrote The Girl in the Spider's Web, I remember this young autistic boy I once met with the savant skills. I actually met a young boy that was 8 or 7 years old, and he was deaf and didn't speak, and he one day passed a traffic light, and he was able, without anyone had taught him about three-dimensional drawing, he wrote it perfectly. And that sort of statement, you have heard of this savant? Yeah, it's fantastic. And this time I remember a story I did about two identical twins, because in the 30s Sweden were not a welfare state. We were very poor, so there were actually 500 identical twins who were separated by birth because their mother couldn't afford to have them, or maybe they were born out of marriage. And I actually met two identical twin sisters who were now in the 70s, but they didn't know that they existed before they were 29. And they met by coincidence. And the really mind-blowing thing about that was that one of them was brought up in a very academic home high up in north, and got all the abilities to have education. And the other one had been working at a farm. And that was absolute mad. And all these twins are now part of science studies of what creates us. It's really interesting. I mean, how much is genes and how much is our social surroundings. And that was really a mind-blowing thing for me. I'm always interested in science. And I think part of it came from all the, there were quite a controversy when, they released the fact that I would write a book in Stieg Larsson, because they say, how could David do it? Because Stieg Larsson was working class, and I, was fortunate. And then, of course, I start to think, what would I have been if I was not brought up in this very literary home? Isn't it mind-blowing? I mean, I have friends who are now brilliant writers, and they're adopted. They were poor in Korea. What would have happened to them? And so I sort of I found my inspiration in that old story. So I tend to go back, to my old best stories.
Well, nature versus nurture.
Yeah,
it probably
yes,
never will be fully resolved.
But the interesting thing, maybe I can mention, that we all know that we are not, you all have siblings, or many of you haven't you? And you're not, I mean, very often you're very unlike, aren't you? Yeah. And even though you share half your genes. So what really creates us is not, the big surrounding, it's what you call the micro environment, when genes and the surrounding mix. And we have certain genes and certain talents, and we sort of tend to seek things that stimulate us and escape things that, make us uncomfortable. So I think what also got me going is the feeling we all maybe have in life when we suddenly feel home. We can read something and we can hear a piece of music and, yes, this is me. And then we tend to go. And the fantastic thing about this twin sister, their life were really, different in many ways, but they had the same kind of way of making, they heard of themselves, because they were so funny, and they had this ability to talk in all kinds of dialects, and they used it because they suddenly find out, that I can. So they had. I think that's very interesting, and I think to go back to your life when you have a situation that you feel, oh yes, this is me.
I think exploring the twin, or having them, underlines much of what you said. It must be very fun for you.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, because everyone will be wanting to ask it if I don't. It was just been announced that Claire Foy will star in the movie version of The Girl in the Spider's Web, due out in October 2018 from Sony. Do you think that fans will accept this shift in
I think she
an
will
actor?
be brilliant. Have you seen The Crown on Netflix? Wasn't it great?
Yeah.
Wasn't it great? I mean, even though it's quite a big step to go from Queen Elizabeth to Elizabeth Salander, but a good actor could cope with that. Now, I actually met the producer and director, Fede Alvarez, and then I did a very thorough casting, and they all saying she was absolutely fabulous.
I think,
She will not be queen like that. Like Elizabeth Salander.
Now, since this is your Lisbeth, I think having a different actor is a nice way of going forward with that too. Don't you? Say a couple words about this book, which I'm extremely fond of. Wilmslow is actually a place, in case any of you are wondering. It's a town in England. Alan Turing, are you all familiar with Alan Turing? Mm-hmm. By now we all know about Bletchley Park and computers and the poisoned apple and the whole bit. What interested you in Turing?
Well,
it's one of my favorite books.
There's so many things. First of all, I could say that when I go back to my authorship, I've always been writing about people outsider, people that are different. Maybe that was one of the reasons I was so fascinated about Lisbeth Salander. And Alan Turing certainly was different. Maybe he was, Asperger, and he was homosexual, and he was, he didn't really was that social. So he was a man who could see all we others who are so, keen to be popular. We tend to think the same thing as everybody else, in our community. But if you're an outsider, you could of course be crushed, because it's hard to be an outsider. But they're often the outsider, the different people who come up with the great ideas. And I just read a very strange thing, because I was reading about Wittgenstein, and I thought it was a so horrible, esoteric intellectual. They were talking about paradox. And then I saw in a little footnote that Turing's thoughts about this paradox actually led to the modern computer. And that was absolutely mind-blowing. This is a crazy question. It could lead to the modern computer. And it all sort of started that a mathematical professor said, maybe there's a mechanical solution for that mathematical problem. And the professor meant there's been a mechanical solution in the way you could sort of repeat a certain technique. But he thought maybe it could be a machine. And then he thought, the game, guess a person. You know that? Who you thinking of? Is it a man? Or what? Is it a man? Yes. And then you can find out a lot. So he sort of thought that just put yes or no, or 1 or 0.
Binary.
Right.
Yeah, binary. And then of course he was sent to Bletchley Park, and you all about that, and the secret parts of Winston Churchill's memoirs. I mean, he mentioned that if there was one person who really influenced the course of the war, it was Alan Turing, breaking the Enigma code. So he was, a hero in the most way you even can think of. He was the father of the computer, and he was the breaker of the code. And what happened, do you think? Did he go home and have a medals and meet the Queen? No, because it was all secret he has done, so he couldn't mention it. And he was homosexual.
When it was still a crime.
Yeah.
When it was illegal. And he admitted it, because he thought there was nothing wrong being it. And back in those days, the bloody idiots, sorry to say that, thought that you could cure it with giving female hormones. And they gave actually Alan Turing, one of the most influential, great thinker of the last century. They made him a lab rat, and they gave him female hormones. And was it now 1953 when McCartney was, having his high here in the States, and they were not only chasing everyone who was a bit socialistic, but also homosexual. He went up in his house in Winslow, and he loved the child movie. Maybe you still remember it, the Snow White with the 7 dwarfs. So he dipped an apple in cyanide and killed himself. And that was, when I heard about that, was absolutely heartbreaking. He of all. And when I think of it now, I sort of had this feeling that I wanted to wake him up. And, Alan, for God's sake, look, you created a computer. You are now the biggest war hero. You're an icon. And he is one of the posthumous, heroes. We have, of course, Franz Kafka. We have Van Gogh, who never sold the painting for his brother. And we have Stieg Larsson, who's now is such an icon, so you can't even believe it. But he was absolutely unknown. Even I, that was a reporter. So that's also a thought. One of the posthumous, it's so sad. They were great.
Years ago in London, and I don't remember the name of it, there was a wonderful play about Alan Turing, and it ends with him biting into the apple, and Derek Jacobi played Alan Turing.
Yes.
And I remember I just couldn't stop crying, when it was just remarkable.
No, it's heartbreaking.
Well, David, thank you for all this. Why don't we see if we could take questions, or you can take rather questions from the audience. So any of you who would like to ask a question, this is your moment.
You said that you
just reread and reread? Was there, I mean, anything like 6 notes or anything that you had else to go off of to get into?
No, I mean, there's rumors that he left 200 pages, but I hadn't seen them. So I just had the books, and then I had his writing, his other writing, of course. I can see his moral pathos, you know, he really was fighting intolerance and extreme right and racism. But I had a book, and that was pretty good. So I read them and read them and read them, but after a while, I actually had to stop reading them. Because I can't be, you know, afraid. I can just look, how did Stieg Larsson solve that? So I had to, you know, read them till I had them in my system. And then I also had them on PhD files, so I could search what happened now with that. So, yeah.
What else?
Yes, sorry.
My wife couldn't be here today, but she asked that I ask you a question. This is something I didn't remember, but she said that at the end of Stieg Larsson's 3rd book, Blomquist, Mikala was in a romantic relationship.
Yes.
With a woman, and the girl in the spider's web, she was nowhere to be seen.
Oh yeah, but all, you know, stories, they need a new lady. But to be honest, yeah, I mean, he's a womanizer. He was maybe even too much of a womanizer for me. Sometimes I couldn't understand, and he didn't have to charm the ladies. He just sort of fell apart when they saw him. It never happened to me, so sadly not. But to be honest, what I had to do was certain characters connected to me. You know, like Boblamsky, you know, and the Hacker Republic, and certainly Holger Palmgren, and others didn't. So I had to go for the characters. I mean, the most important characters around them, Erika Berger, and, you know, all them I had to have. But some characters I didn't really understand. And she was one of them. Maybe I thought it was, you know, if they were fall in love and they get married, and maybe that would be another Mikael Blomkvist. Just like I don't think I think there's certainly an attractiveness between Lisbeth and Michael, but I don't think they should have 3 kids and lead them to daycare. It wouldn't be Lisbeth Salander, would it?
Actually, I'll put in a plug for Mr. Palmgren. I think you did a wonderful job with Mr. Palmgren in this book.
Yeah.
You know,
well, yeah, he's one of my favorites.
In all books, you know, in all series and so forth, different characters come forward at different times depending on what the story is. And, you know, the author can't bring the entire panoply of past characters into every book, or the whole thing would just fall apart under the weight.
I mean, and you readers actually are so important, because I think really Stieg Larsson started with Mikael Blomkvist as the real hero, and then he had his interesting sidekick who came along quite late in writing, and that happens in series. Suddenly it's the sidekick who really is the thing.
Somebody steals the book.
Yeah.
But as a journalist, you would have a certain understanding and sympathy of Mikael, that,
yes,
you know,
course.
Because you've done that yourself.
Yes, of course, yes.
And his role in this book as a journalist is really significant.
Absolutely. No. I used to say that if you really want to write good journalists, you should use literary techniques. But if you want to write good fiction and good crime fiction, you should do journalistic research. And I must admit, I'm so bad with computers. You can't even believe it. It gets me so nervous. And Lisbeth Salander is not bad with computers. So what shall I do? I do as I did as a reporter. You know, there are 3 kinds of hackers. You know that? I can tell you short. There's the black hats, and they're the really bad guys. They're the ones sending virus into our computers and stealing things. Okay? And they're the gray hats. They could do illegal things like Lisbeth Salander, but with good causes. And then there is the white hats, and they have companies, and they're, you know, big company banks hire them, try to hack us and tell us they're a security hole. So I just asked, you know, anywhere around, who is the best white hacker in Sweden? And they said this David Jacobi. Okay, so I called David Jacobi. Do you want to be my Lisbeth Salander? And he said, yes! So, when Lisbeth Salander needs to hack something, I had a tricky question for him in the fourth book. I said, well, don't be nervous, no, but I think she must hack NSA. How would she do that? well, he said. Yeah, sorry.
So it seems in a lot of the books, Elizabeth and Mikhail, they're separated.
Yes.
They're not kind of working together. How do you, when you wake up in the morning, you writing today? I'm writing Elizabeth's trail or Mikhail's, or do you just write them together? Or do you get in a frame of mind that you want to work on one?
I mean, Stieg Larsson had this different perspective. I mean, in one chapter you're into Lisbeth's, perspective, and then to Michael's, and sometimes in the village shift's perspective, and that's very effective. But I'm also thinking about what the relation really are. I mean, are they in love? Are they friends? Are Michael a sort of a father figure, or maybe are they? Or and then, of course, the most important question of all: how much sex shall they have? sorry. But I actually had that this question with an audience when we did that. They were quite upset that
there wasn't enough sex.
There wasn't enough. No, there should be more. So maybe I should bring them tighter together. We will see about that. Yes, sir. That was somewhere else. No, that was it. Sorry.
One question. I've heard that the name of the first novel that Steve wrote was changed dramatically when it came to the United States, that it wasn't originally The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Could you translate the original better for us?
Man Who Hates Women.
That's what I'd heard. Now, that seemed to be, once I heard that, looking back, I said, boy, that's pretty blunt, but a lot of it is about that.
Yeah, that is really about that. And I think it was important for Stieg Larsson that he fight, racism and feminism, and he was really, I think, one of the reasons that his book were such a success was just not that there was wonderful entertainment. He had his moral pathos.
Did that carry through in your books then?
Yes,
too?
absolutely. If I didn't share, his core values, I think I couldn't write it. And I think it's part of the reason also that there is such a success, that she's really a feminist fighter. And I think that there's no coincidence that Stieg Larsson, that she was invented in Sweden, because we are a bit ahead, and I'm very proud of that in that matter. Yeah.
It has to have tapped into a core all over the world for these books to become international bestsellers. I mean, they've spoken to people in many different countries with many different cultures, but you have to be able to relate all of us,
But I think what really happened, and we don't really realize that how much she changed crime fiction. If we go back just a couple of decades, or some centuries, who was the female heroine? She was sitting in a castle waiting for the knight on the white horse, rescuing her. Or in the beginning of the crime fiction area, there were women they were mostly beautiful and victims, and they certainly needed a man to protect them and rescue them. But Lisbeth was something else. She didn't need anyone. She didn't even need to please the man, and I think that was very important, for young female readers. She was, yes.
Touched off. I think it's one reason.
And he did give her, traditional female values like, motherly and things. She was something new, and now we see sort of Lisbeth clones all over, don't we?
Yes, but I think your point was an interesting one.
The other leap was, it worked in Sweden and in parts of Europe. Why do you think the editors chose not to use that title here?
I think the title was, I know for certain that the Swedish publisher didn't like the title either, but he really wanted to have it because, it was sort of And then I think they earlier saw here that the girl was the story, actually. The girl, and now it's maybe too much girl title, isn't it? There's the girl titles all
Way
over
too
now.
many, yes.
Yeah,
but Steve was in there
But
at the
Steve was
very
there
beginning.
at the beginning.
And
yeah,
also,
so-
you know, the dragon tattoo conjures up all kinds of images and so forth. It's a much more dramatic, although it cuts across the general wisdom of titles. The general wisdom of titles is that they should be short. You know, most American publishers, 2 words is good, 3 is okay, but it's really rare that you can do more. So it's an interesting title. I mean, you know, for years James Lee Burke won the title award, you know, in The Electric Mist with the Confederate dead. It took up the whole front of the book. And how did he get away with that? Because he was James Lee Burke. But you know, I think it's the dragon tattoo, the images, the spider's web and so forth that make such a difference. But I have a question for you, Magdalena. Where did the books first become bestsellers? Was it in Sweden or was it in England? Where was it?
Definitely not in England. It was. They sold well, book 1 and 2, when they came out, but when they really took off was with book 3.
Okay.
And the same thing happened in France. They were very quick to translate, and it was the same thing that with book 2 it started going really well, and then with book 3 it started going crazy. So
All
France
over?
and Sweden,
all over.
yeah.
And then when did the movie come along? At what point? Was it after Steve died?
Oh yeah.
I've lost track of the chronology. So, because the movie is such a driver for sales.
But Stig died actually sadly before the first book
Before
was
the
published.
Before the books were published. That's right. I forgot about that.
So I recently discovered that he must be a great thing for he before he died. He just know that the Netherlands and the Germans have bought the book. And that was a big thing for him because it's not often you get a book translated before it's published. And then suddenly enough the elevator didn't work and he had to take the stairs. So it was so sad.
It was sad. Anyone else before we stop? We haven't looked over here. Any of you have a question that we're ignoring? Okay. Then I have a final question, which is, at this point, long-form storytelling with television, you know, is sort of changing how people think about books into film. But Sony owns the right to these, right? So they have the right to make the movie. But would you be interested in a, you know, multi TV episode treatment of your books, or is that not even possible because Sony has the rights
Sony
to it?
has to.
They would have to decide
the
that,
film
right?
rights and the sequel rights is very complicated. You know, there's lawyers all over in Hollywood, so you get really.
I realize
crazy.
you don't probably
Yes.
have any control over it, but have you seen some of the, you know, novels, the TV treatments of novels?
What do you mean about this book? Or?
Many episodes on television to...
No, but they haven't done much with Lisbeth Salander.
No, I haven't. I know they haven't done it with Lisbeth, but have you seen other authors' books done that way, and would that interest you?
Well, if it's good, it will interest me. I mean, if I feel the fever, it will interest me. But first of all, now we will hope that this first movie, and now they've said that they will make a movie on this one as well.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
And then probably the last one. So we'll probably have 3,
Hopefully.
all things considered. Well, I hope that you will all thank David for coming to see
Thank
us.
you.
this evening.